Um, in one place, you are described as an evolutionary biologist. What is that, and how does one become one of those?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to characterize what I am. Just the real story is I was physics, math, undergrad, PhD was math. But if you read my high school letter to college, it said I'm going to go. I want to answer the questions to the universe. Want to understand consciousness and all of the deep philosophical / cognitive kinds of cool questions in the universe. And I said, but I need to go do math and physics first, and possibly even a PhD in math. So then after my PhD in math, my first job was a computer scientist professor in Ireland. And then I started doing postdocs. I was a postdoc in neuroscience and psychology at Duke University, won a Sloan Swartz Fellowship in theoretical neuroscience at Caltech. I was there for four or so years. And I was a cognitive science professor up at RPI in upstate New York. And then I started my own research institute about 12 years ago. And so I've been sort of an independent academic, free from academia, sort of buying my intellectual freedom. And I started a company, Vino Optics, that sort of comes out of my tech, some of my research that funds me. So I'm really, a lot of the stuff that I work on is evolutionary biology, but it's really always about why we are the way we are, why we are engineered the way we are. And often you're looking at natural selection. Let's say why we have color vision. We have color vision, I argued, not because of finding fruit in the forest. Colors actually allows you to see oxygenation modulations of blood under the skin. It's actually peculiarly optimized so that primates can see emotions on their skin, blushes, blanches, and things like this. You get pruny fingers, just to give you a couple natural selection stories. You get pruny fingers because they're actually optimized for rain treads. They actually are optimal for channeling out the water so that you don't hydroplane when you're a primate or gripping in wet or dewy circumstances.
Interesting.
And a lot of the other stuff is cultural evolution. Like culture itself is a blind watchmaker like natural selection. And over time, so the reason that we can read at all is not that we evolved to read, but because cultural selection over time turned letters and made them look like something we're already good at seeing. Namely, letters look like the contour conglomerations that happen out in nature, the kinds of T junctions that occur when a contour goes behind something, and Y junctions. And you can work out the space of all the possible junctions. Some of them happen commonly in the world. Some of them are rare in the world. The ones that happen commonly in the world in three-dimensional environments are the ones that you find across hundreds of human writing systems. So
wow.
we end up with the design of both worlds. That's the kind of stuff that I work on.
That's really fascinating because I started to think about tree twigs, and I would imagine twigs could also be seen as those kinds of junctures that you're talking about.
So the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a Y, for a layman, when you say a Y junction, for example, might be a twig, but that's not actually what we mean. When we say a Y junction, we mean just like look up to the corner of the room that you're in, and you look at the three-dimensional inner corner, for example. Then you're looking at a Y junction of three contours that meet from three different angles.
From three.
And or the outside corner of a box, which will be three contours meeting. An actual Y junction, which is not a true junction of a twig, would actually just be a three-dimensional, from sufficiently far away, it might look vaguely contour-like, but it's in fact not it would not count as one of these junctions.
But you're using rooms and domiciles as examples of this. And would we have had rooms and domiciles already when writing began?
No. So I just use it because odds are you were, and the listener was reading or sitting in a room where they could see these things. So the way that we actually test this is any kind of world in which there are opaque objects, opaque macroscopic, objects are going to have a particular signature distribution of which kinds of these contour conglomerations or junction types occur. And then you can work it out. You can say, as long as it's just any sort of random-ish opaque object environment, you end up with certain kinds of things. X's are rare, for example. X's don't happen amongst opaque objects very often, but L junctions and T junctions happen a lot. Whenever objects go behind each other, you get a T junction. Now, if it's a semi-transparent world, like if you're living in a world with like jellyfish floating around, or you can imagine a world that's not like our opaque world, in which case you would get a different distribution. Different kinds of those junctions would be really common compared to us today. And they would have a different kinds of writing systems, animals that evolved in a world that was all semi-transparent. And so they would end up with the different kinds of brains that are good at processing different kinds of junctions and end up with a different kind of writing system. But most creatures that you could possibly imagine on most planets probably are walking around with opaque objects, which means that they're going to have writing systems that are probably vaguely like ours that we find here on Earth, because they're going to end up with the same universal pattern of which junctions are common and which junctions are not, because it's a fundamental mathematical thing, not per se a savanna thing or a forest thing. It's just a very fundamentally universal kind of mathematical result.
Wow. It's interesting that mathematics comes into play here. Now, you mentioned other planets with beings on them. Is that something that you actually think is out there, or just a random example?
It's just, I mean, in this case, I'm just using it as a thought experiment. Sometimes it's nice to think in those terms, because once you have a discovery, it can sometimes be useful to say, how universal is this? Like, is this stuff that we do? Like, for example, we all see illusions, the kind of geometrical illusions. And one of my arguments is that the reason we see illusions is this is because it's very fundamental. You have a delay. When light hits your eye, it takes about 1/10 of a second before you create a perception. So in real life, you don't want to just generate perceptions based on what hit your eye. You want to anticipate what the next moment's going to look like, because that way, by the time you've built your perception, that perception is of the present. So it turns out that a lot of these illusions that you see, and I have a TED talk on this, like the ones where you have a bunch of radial lines and 2 vertical lines, and the 2 vertical lines appear to bow outwards.
Yeah.
Those radial lines are exactly the kinds of cues that you get when you move forward. When you move forward, you get optic blur on your retina, or any kind of alien eyeball, right? You'd have stuff flowing outwards when you move forward. And any alien in any part of the universe anywhere is not going to have instantaneous perceptions. They're going to take a little bit of time to compute it, which means they're going to have the same illusions that we are, because those illusions are just following the dynamics of projective geometry and how projective geometry changes in the next moment. So then you can say, wow, these illusions, which seem really peculiar and something funny about humans, no, they're not peculiar. They're a universal expected thing. Whereas color vision, the red-green color vision that we primates evolved, is peculiar because it really has to do with seeing the weird oxygenation modulations of hemoglobin under the skin, which is something that no alien is going to give a damn about, right? Like, that's just a really peculiarly human thing. Maybe they've got other perceptual things that help them read the emotions on, their species, but it's not going to see red-green in the way that we see red-green, because that would not be something. You don't expect aliens to see reds and greens colored in the world like we do, but we do expect them to see illusions of the geometrical kinds of illusions like we do. And I think that's useful. It's informative, and it makes it fun.
Yeah, just to make sure I'm following here. So you're saying we perceive color so that we can tell what the emotional states are of our fellow human beings.
That's right. So